Does everyone have a handout?
Are we all set? Wonderful.
Great. So, thank you. I'll take one side for fun. So today I want to investigate developments in how ancient Greeks and Romans envisaged the future of their societies. In classical Greece, in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, it was taken for granted that power on a societal level, as well as on an individual one, was transient. That great empires were not going to be permanent, and indeed that no state was ever thought of as being eternal. In the classical Greek mindset, if you go far enough into the future, every city or empire will meet its end. The first historian that we have surviving, the classical Greek historian Herodotus, who's writing towards the end of the 5th century BCE, made this assumption of societal impermanence fundamental to the project of history writing. And we see this in the preface to his history, and this is number 1 on our handout. At the top of the handout is a little key with kind of rough dates to orient ourselves to what we're talking about. But then number 1 on the handout is the preface to Herodotus' history. Well, Herodotus says that states that used to be great have now become small, and those that were small have become great in his time. He views societal instability as all-embracing, so it's not restricted to particular types of states or particular time periods. And his language is emphatic. So he says here in this number 1, he knows that human prosperity never remains in the same place. The question I address in this talk today is what happens to this expectation of impermanence, central to the narratives of ancient classical Greek history writing, when historians are confronted with Rome, a power that rises, and at least for the period we'll be looking at, shows no sign of an imminent fall. And when historians must keep on waiting for this never-arriving end of Rome, do they change the way they envisage the end of Rome? Do they change this assumption? And if so, what new temporal assumptions replace those that previously dominated the way history was written? So let's turn to a historian called Dionysius Halicarnassus. He's from the same city-state as Herodotus Halicarnassus, also writing in Greek, but he's writing 4 centuries later, and he's writing about Rome, about the rise of Rome. And this is around the year 0, during the reign of the first Roman emperor, Augustus. So when it comes to describing a politician on the rise, an individual who's growing great, Dionysius often has that portending a fall. So a rise to greatness for individuals, something that might bring about that individual's undoing. And in fact, in his period, this is kind of a hackneyed trope, the idea of the wheel of fortune, even more so than classical Greece, that someone rises, they're going to fall. But for the state of Rome, this hackneyed trope doesn't apply. So when Herodotus said that smaller states become big and big states become small, by contrast, when we read Dionysius, he says only the first half of that statement. Rome used to be small, it's become great. The second half of that assumption, that and therefore it's now great, it's going to be small, is not found. And we see this commonly throughout Dionysius' history in different refrains. So there's a speech in Dionysius' history where the third king of Rome, Tullus, this is number 2 on the handout, says that Rome's virtues have led to Rome from a small and contemptible beginning, becoming large and formidable to its neighbors. The phrase is used in a speech by a divine voice, a godly voice that tells Aeneas, who's the Trojan hero, one of the founding figures of Rome, that it is fated that from a small habitation, Aeneas will in time acquire a great and powerful land. So Rome's power is viewed as divinely sanctioned, and this is number 3 on the handout, that Aeneas tells his men that Rome will overcome its adversaries, since the good fortune that Rome had from God was more powerful than the envy of the men that opposed Rome. So we have all these statements of Rome from small to big, and it's going to overcome the forces that will turn it, that would otherwise go from big to small. So what used to be almost societal hubris, that greatness is treated as dangerous, is no longer being treated as dangerous when it's being used to describe the state of Rome in the 1st century BCE. But Dionysius even celebrates the splendor and greatness of Rome, triumphantly. So in the opening chapters of his history, he hails the size of the Roman Empire, the beauty of its achievements, the length of its rule over time. And an analogous passage which clearly praises greatness, without a hint that this will lead to some undoing in the future can be found in classical Greek historians. Dionysius is not an outlier among the historians of the early Roman Empire. And so let's turn to another historian writing 3 or 4 decades after Dionysius, called Velleius Paterculus. So writing about, from the same time period, writing in Latin, and he's writing under Emperor Tiberius, the second emperor of Rome. This is number 4 on the handout, where Velleius writes that the prospect of Tiberius's birth is a good omen for the Republic. Tiberius's return to Rome makes people hope for the perpetual security and the eternal existence of the Roman Empire. And at the end of the passage, Velleius writes that these people's hopes were in fact fulfilled, suggesting that this hope for eternity has come true in Tiberius's time. However, there's another side that I want to investigate in the rest of this talk, which is that this eternity that we hear stated in the Roman historians is often equivocally stated. So at the start of Book 2 of Velleius' history, this is on the other side of the handout, number 5, Velleius writes, Velleius is comparing the death of great families to the death of great cities and empires. And Velleius writes, within about 12 years during this period, the Metelli, a famous Roman family, were distinguished by consulships, censorships, triumphs more than 12 times, so big awards. And therefore it is clear that, as in the case of cities and empires, so the fortunes of families flourish, but then they grow old and they fade away. The Metelli fade away, despite getting all these consulships. And in this passage, Velleius is sounding a lot like Herodotus. Right? He's taking up themes about the rise and fall of nations. And by not explicitly excluding Rome from this general statement, it's perhaps suggesting that the succession of world empires does not stop with Rome. It's not the end point. So one scholar, Edward Bispham, argues for this reading. And here I quote Bispham, who said, "Did Velleius consider that Rome had bucked the trend, that finally the gods had made good on their promise of empire without end? In Virgil's terms, that a happy ending and eternal domination of Rome was assured? It seems not." End quote. So Bispham thinks Velleius has a pessimistic view here. But I want to argue that we shouldn't be trying to pick out only one rhythm from Velleius' history when both are clearly within the same work. So for Velleius, in some passages, it's clear that Tiberius' Rome is eternal. But in other passages, he makes quite clear that this might be coming to an end, right? Both are in tension together. You can kind of isolate one, make that his way of seeing the future of Rome. I think this uncomfortable duality is clearest when we read the very ending of Velleius' history. And this is quite a long passage. I'll read it out very quickly on number 6 on the handout, where he's praying Velleius at the end of his history. He's finished his account of Rome, and then he prays for the future preservation of Rome. And he writes, "O Jupiter Capitolinus and Mars Redivus, the author and stay, preserver of the Roman name, Vesta, guardian of eternal fires, all other divinities who have exalted this mass of Rome's empire to the highest extremity yet reached on earth. On you I call, and to you I pray in the name of this people. God, preserve, protect the present state of things, the peace which we enjoy, the present emperor. And when he has filled his post of duty and made it be the longest granted to mortals, grant him successors until the latest time, for successors whose necks may be as capable of sustaining bravely the empire of the world as we have found his to be. Foster the pious plans of all good citizens." The gods Velleius is calling upon are those who are most closely associated with the idea of Rome's eternity, that's being articulated in religious settings in the 1st century BCE. This is Jupiter and Vesta, Vesta whose vestal virgins always tend to the eternal fire of Vesta. So Velleius is praying for the protection and preservation of the current state of affairs. So the preservation is not a foregone conclusion, at least. We can start with that. He needs to pray for it. And as the prayer continues, Velleius reveals more fears about Rome's eternity. Is the description of this great height to which the gods have raised this mass of the Roman Empire, is this a celebration of success? Or does this have a slightly ominous tinge to it, the idea that this mass might fall over, as we hear in other passages, we hear the great mass undoing itself. Velleius talks in this passage about Tiberius' mortality, mortal emperors looking after a potentially immortal empire. Does this add a worrying kind of dissonance to how these two fit together? And what if Velleius is concerned that future emperors may not have strong enough necks to sustain this empire of the world? And he hopes that imperial successes will continue until the latest time. Got a not clear phrase, what exactly it means to continue to the latest time. Is this forever? Valea seems to be stating, but uncertainly, the potential permanence of the empire. This is a prayer for Rome's eternity, but it's an anxious prayer. We find similar uncertainties in Dionysius' history, who we were looking at just before this. Dionysius writes that when a temple associated with eternity, the Capitoline Temple, was being constructed, all the altars that were previously on that spot of the hill before the temple was built had to be moved. And the gods of those temples, of those altars, were petitioned, saying, "Can we move your altars?" And only two gods said no. Those were Terminus and Juventus. These were saying boundary points in the future of Rome. Did not allow them altars to be moved. And so the altars were included within the Capitoline Temple. This is number 7 on the handout. From this circumstance, the priests concluded that no occasion would ever cause the removal of the boundaries of the Roman city, or change Rome's acme, change Rome's height. And both have proved down to my day, which is already the 24th generation. So Dionysius is confirming the priest's pronouncement about Rome's eternity, but in a slightly worrying way. So far, the priests are correct about the eternity of Rome. So he's kind of undermining the priest's prophecy in the process of affirming it. This is currently eternal. So Dionysius and Velleius present us with an equivocal eternity. And this is something new, as we've said. So not even the potential for societal eternity is entertained in any classical Greek thought. So even Plato, when he's talking about his ideal republic, states that when this republic is founded on earth, it will eventually pass away and disappear. So the fact that some idea of eternity is stated even equivocally is new. But the equivocal eternity is also different from what we're used to from the Judeo-Christian concept of eternity, which is normally quite an absolute eternity without caveats. Right? The kingdom of God is eternal. This doesn't come with ifs or buts. There's no conditional statements. If only you do X, Y, and Z, perhaps then will be eternal. And so this two last examples here show the kind of, I'll maybe for the reasons of time, just do the last one, number 9, which I think shows well the provisional nature of Rome's eternity, not in a historian, but in the orator and politician Cicero, who said, as long as the race of men, as long as the name of the Roman people shall exist, and that will be everlasting, unless it's prevented from being so by you, Mark Antony. Right? So this is an idea of a religious, eternal Rome, but Mark Antony might screw this up. So as Benjamin Itzhak said, he's from Tel Aviv University, a scholar here, in Cicero it's visible, and I quote, a mixture of anxiety that the state could be destroyed from within, and hope that it might be eternal and ever-expanding. I want to end by saying, discussing ancient concepts of time, scholars have tended, such as Reinhard Koselleck, to see it as a uniform. So he writes about the Historia Magistra Vitae, that history is a teacher of life, being the topos, the function of history for about 2,000 years. And following Koselleck, you have François Hartog's first regime of historicity, which talks about exemplarity spanning from Cicero onwards to the 18th century France. And so we tend to see in the pre-modern and pre-enlightenment, we miss out the diversity of different visions of the future. And so what we're sitting here today is something which is not what we're used to with the rise and fall trope we're used to in classical Greece. It's not the Christian concept of time, and the Judeo-Christian one of eternity that's taken without any ifs or buts, but it's a Roman eternity that's anxious, it's precarious, that's conditional, an eternity that's liable to end. It's a divinely sanctioned eternity, but it's also, I would say, a particularly human idea of eternity. Thank you.